My husband and I are both people persons. I used to work at the maternity ward at a local hospital while he's a private trainer at a popular gym downtown. He always has a story to tell about the many strange people that he meets in his line of work, but it's never mean-spirited. He shares the occasional anecdote or bizarre quote. People say the darndest things. Not too long ago, I lost my job at the hospital. They were restructuring the maternity ward. Most people were reassigned or fired. It was tough finding something new, but even tougher to stay positive. While my husband went on and on about the many interesting characters that he had met, I had little to share but what jobs I had applied to. After 2 months of searching, my husband had a proposition. Turns out one of his regulars had need for a private nurse. I'm using a fake name here to keep some semblance of privacy, as what I'm about to tell you relates to his medical history. Let's call this client Lucas. Lucas is not the kind of person you think would have need for on-site medical assistance. He's in his early 40s and has exceptional physical health. Since the reason behind his need for a nurse was very much a personal health matter, my husband had no idea what the job was really about. There was nothing obviously wrong with Lucas. You can just talk to him, my husband said. If you don't like it, that's fine. I was very against it at first, but after 2 months of rejection letters, or no letters at all, I was willing to give anything a shot. It'd be nice to have something new to talk about, to share an equal scoop of, you'll never guess what happened at work today, at the dinner table. So my husband set up a meeting. I met Lucas at his mansion one late October afternoon. The sun was already setting, but it was the only time that he was off work. Lucas worked at least 10 hours a day, sometimes more, and often on the weekends. Still, it afforded him the luxury of a high-end lifestyle, with the cars and housing to go with it. Parking my Toyota in his driveway felt like an insult, and the check engine light taunted me. Lucas came out to meet me with a hand outstretched. He was tall and athletic, with thick, bottle-cap-like glasses. He covered his bald head with a black baseball cap, proudly displaying the company logo. I won't share what it is, but you would recognize it. Guaranteed. I shook his hand and took a good look at him. I could tell that behind his perfectly white teeth and upper body strength, this man was exhausted. The eyes couldn't lie about that. Thank you for coming along, Lucas said. If you're half as fantastic as your husband is telling me, we're gonna get along just fine. If I were even half as fantastic as my husband says, I'd be running this country, I laughed. But thank you. He gave me a quick tour of his 3-bedroom house, taking the time to acquaint me with his lifestyle. Apart from work, he didn't do much. Working out, going on the occasional hunting trip, swimming. Lucas worked remotely as a sort of liaison for a multinational company and had to be on standby if there was anything major going down. He spent a lot of time writing messages in relation to major shareholders and handled at least 2 major investment relations. It was high-stakes work with hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs on the line. If I make a bad call, we could inadvertently shut down a small town in New England, he said. And that's not an exaggeration. That's an actual problem right now. And there it was. That was the quote that I was bringing home to the dinner table. It felt good to be back. After the tour, Lucas sat me down in the kitchen and offered me a glass of carrot juice. His kitchen was bigger than my living room, and it seemed like half the cabinets were empty. The man had 6 types of freshly pressed juice, ready to go. Well, you seem to have it all figured out, I smiled. I can't imagine why you would need a trained health professional. I get why you would think that, said Lucas, polishing his glasses. But I have a condition and it's starting to become a concern. I need someone with experience and, discretion. Well, of course, I said. Patient confidentiality extends to nurses. So any and all conditions that I may or may not have stays between us. Well, absolutely. I took a sip of the carrot juice, feeling a bit of a sting. I coughed. There's some chili in there, he smiled. It's spicier than it looks. We walked out to the terrace overlooking his backyard. He had a nice, handmade furniture set along with a barbecue, but I could tell that it hadn't been used in a while. The view was pretty neat though. There was a large open space with a decently cut lawn. You could see the edge of town to the east, and a vast forest to the west. Birch mostly. There are all kinds of sleep disorders, he said. People who talk, walk, or scream in their sleep. Some don't sleep at all. I have something similar and I need someone to make sure that I'm okay. Well, that sounds serious. Are we talking about sleep apnea or something? I got these pills, right? Lucas said, rattling a pill bottle. It's like turning off a light. Knocks me out cold. It's the only way that I can sleep without being a danger to myself. But they're a pain in the butt. Side effects are nasty. What happens if you don't take them? Well, that's what you're here for, Lucas sighed. I have a form of hypernoctambulism, and this is where Lucas informed me of his ailment. Up until that point, I had never heard of it. A lot of people know about sleepwalking, but this was much more severe. Hypernoctambulism, or in more common words, sleeprunning. It sounded absurd. He showed me to his bedroom. While the rest of his house was tidy, this place was a mess. His king-sized bed looked like it hadn't been made in weeks. There were pill bottles on the nightstand, along with gadgets and clothes strewn across half the bed. He had nailed some sort of straps to the side of the bed, and he had a mouthguard next to his pillow. I frequently run into things, he said. I knocked out a tooth once. I gotta take precautions. He explained the various ways that he tried to control it. Strapping himself down would work sometimes, unless he had managed to worm his way out. He had tried literal chains and handcuffs, but he just ended up hurting himself. His bruises would get so bad that they eventually broke through the skin. He showed me scars along his arms. I move so much that it chafes all the way through, he said. It gets a bit better with the Velcro straps, but they're easier to get out of. He showed me his turquoise sleeping shoes. Since he could take off running, he would often hurt his feet. Waking up at the side of the road with bloody soles was a nightmare in and of itself. I could tell this was a major part of his life. He told me at length about the many ways that he had tried to fix it, and he always came back to that pill bottle. He hated it. It wore him out and left him feeling dazed all day long, which was starting to affect his work. Lucas needed someone to check up on him a few nights a week to make sure that he could sleep without taking those pills, and without hurting himself. I figured you could help, he said. Maybe you have some ideas. Don't you have any recommendations from a physician? This is it, he said, rattling the pill bottle. But it's just not working out. Well, then I guess I'd have to see it. You know, figure out what I'm up against. So you're on board then? I was. We agreed on a trial period. We'd start with 3 nights a week, and if it all turned out well, we would increase it to 5. Lucas was okay with taking his pills every now and then, but he wanted as many nights as possible without them. His job was very demanding, and the side effects of the sleeping pills were nasty enough to completely kill his momentum. Sure, sleep running took its toll as well, but at least he got a proper REM cycle out of it, except when he hurt himself. Eventually, we parted ways. We shook hands and I made my way home. While I couldn't tell my husband about Lucas's actual condition, I was eager to talk about my day as a whole. It felt good to contribute to the discussion around the dinner table. Things were balanced again, and I decided then and there that I would do whatever it takes to make this work. I needed this. But there was that itch in the back of my mind that told me this wasn't normal. I had never heard of this condition, and it seemed more than just unusual. I could deal with working nights, but I wasn't prepared for what this job might really entail. I had a feeling it was spicier than expected. And 2 days later, I returned to help Lucas with his first session. I arrived at 9 p.m. and he had already prepared by then. I hadn't planned my sleeping schedule ahead as well as I should have, so I stocked up on mango-flavored energy drinks and chocolate-covered nut bars. Lucas also reminded me that I was free to drink as much fresh-pressed juice as I'd like. He called it a night at around 10 p.m. sharp. He seemed a bit uncomfortable going to bed without strapping himself in, but he kept his sleeping shoes on. Despite all preparations, I felt like I had no idea what was really coming. Lucas seemed genuinely distraught, like he was gearing up for a marathon. He turned on a white noise playlist and turned on the lights, and he asked me to wait outside. "It usually doesn't start right away," he said. "Check in on me in a while." As I left, he cleared his throat and looked up from his pillow. "And close the doors. All of them, just in case." Lucas had an alcove in the hallway outside his bedroom, where he had set up 2 recliners with a table in between. It was insanely comfortable and a perfect setup for reading or listening to audiobooks. Lucas told me that he was okay with me bringing something to do while I waited, so I had stocked up on podcasts. As the hours passed by, it was difficult to imagine what would happen next. It was just past midnight when I heard a strange noise coming from the bedroom, like a shrill groan, slow and drawn out, and then footsteps quickly approaching. I barely had the time to take off my headphones before something slammed into the bedroom door, rattling the paintings on the wall. I could hear Lucas getting up and running back and forth, like a fly trying to get out of an open window. Finally, he gave the bedroom door another smack. This time it gave way. His eyes had rolled back in his skull, and his mouth was wide open. His head was flopping back and forth like a dead fish, and his arms hung haplessly at his side. It was as if he was being pulled forward by the torso, only using his legs to keep up. For a second, he just stood there, as if pondering his options. And then he started running. I didn't know whether to get out of the way or to tackle him, and so I did neither. Instead, he just passed me by, smacking my shoulder as he went along. He hurried down the stairs, clearing 3 steps at a time, and slamming into a wall as these stairs curved to the left. Some kind of diploma came tumbling down, covering the steps in glass. Good thing you wore shoes. I ran after him, and I didn't even notice that I was calling out to him, trying to grab his attention. I know it is said that you shouldn't wake a sleepwalker unless necessary, but he was hurting himself. I had to at least try something. I followed him throughout his house as his flailing arms knocked over every piece of curio along the way. He groaned the entire time, the noise being interrupted with every forceful step like a stalling engine. He accidentally pushed the doors to the terrace open and he ran out into the backyard. I followed him, but he was much faster than anticipated. Seeing him out there was unreal. It felt like a bad dream. He looked like a flesh puppet being pulled along by invisible strings, stumbling forward with what little control that he had left. It wasn't random either. He was going in a straight line, as if towards something. I tried to keep up, but I couldn't run with the same reckless abandon. He was getting away and I was already getting winded. As he reached the edge of the birch forest, his poor motor skills caught up with him as he ran headlong into a birch tree. By the time that I got to him, he was having some sort of micro seizures. He wasn't breathing. I had left my phone upstairs and I couldn't call for help, so I had to act fast. I rolled him onto the side, put my arm under his head and started smacking him between the shoulder blades. 3 or 4 smacks later, I heard his breathing return as slow and steady. He was okay. Lucas took his pills and he dreamlessly passed the night. We scheduled another trial 2 days from then, giving me some time to process what had happened and to plan ahead. I had never seen anything like this before. I was no stranger to patients having seizures or wandering off in a stupor, but this seemed coordinated, purposeful even. 2 days later, I met with Lucas again, a bit earlier this time, so we had time to discuss precautions and what steps to take. I could tell that he was having trouble concentrating, probably a side effect from taking the pills. He had trouble making complete sentences. I didn't have a lot of ideas, just strapping him in would be a temporary fix, but I figured we needed something more permanent. As Lucas stepped outside to take a phone call, I wandered around his house looking for inspiration, and I found something. I don't know if it was brilliance or stupidity, but Lucas had a home gym. Among his possessions were this state-of-the-art treadmill. It was wide enough for 2 people to fit and had tons of settings, including a dynamic speed based on how fast you're running. When Lucas came back, I pointed at it. "Have you tried setting this up?" I asked. "You could run for hours on this thing." "I can't really control it," he said, "but you could try guiding me onto it." "You think that's crazy?" No way," he smiled. "Quite the opposite." We moved it up and set up a dynamic speed and placed it by his bed. We had it in direct line from bed to door, hoping that he would run straight onto it. I also suggested covering the door in protective foam and installing a bolt lock on the outside, something so that he couldn't accidentally open it from the inside. He was very receptive, and even though it was all just loose ideas, he wrote it all down. Lucas was nothing if not thorough. That night, I only stayed in the hallway for a short while waiting for him to fall asleep, and then I went inside and I watched. I had adapted my sleep schedule a bit and I didn't need quite as many mango-flavored energy drinks that night. I made do with some of the chili carrot juice. Most of it was left on the table next to me though. I was too nervous and I kept tapping my foot. It echoed off the hardwood floor. Just short of midnight, Lucas started to stir. I got up and I readied myself. It was such a strange sight. In one swift motion, he went from sleepy into a sit-up to kneeling to full-on sprinting. I placed myself between the treadmill and the door, hoping to tackle him if he missed it. Luckily, he didn't. In 2 steps, he was on that thing, and the electric motor hummed to life. At first, I thought he would be too quick and accidentally tumble over it, but the dynamic setting kicked in and adapted to his pace, and seconds later, he was running at a steady pace. The bars on the side kept him straight. At first, I laughed. It was a relief to see it work. It was such a strange solution, but it was simple enough to do the trick. But all the excitement started to fade as I got a good look at him. His blank eyes, the wide open mouth. I couldn't get over just how alien he looked, and how misappropriated his body was. It really looked like he was using it wrong, like he didn't know what to do with it. And those eyes, there was something there. There was something behind them, something purposeful. It made me cold in my stomach, like I had swallowed a block of ice. Like I was watching something profound, something inhuman. Lucas had slowed down to a jog after about an hour, and fully stopped somewhere around 3 a.m. By then, he just stood there looking straight ahead with those white, dead eyes. Eventually, those eyes closed and he crawled back into bed. By 6 a.m., his alarm went off. He took a shower and he met me downstairs for breakfast, and I could tell that he was in a good mood the way that he hummed along with the radio. I told him what had happened and he was elated. "Oh, this is amazing," he laughed. "Just amazing. You have no idea." He finished up some pancakes, served with cucumber water and a few slices of an orange. He plopped down on a chair across from me. "I feel so energized. I ran it off. No bruises or broken bones, and just a little sweat. This is beyond amazing." "Well, I'm glad we could work something out," I smiled. "You think you're still gonna need my services?" "Are you kidding?" He dried off his hand and reached out to me. "I'm gonna need you at least 5 days a week, maybe 6 if I'm busy. This changes everything." I considered it. It'd be a challenge to stick to that kind of schedule, but the pay he offered would far surpass what I had made at the maternity ward. Besides, I could probably get used to it. Once I got him on the treadmill, the rest of the night was a piece of cake. And so I shook his hand and hoped for the best. For a few weeks, I got into this really weird routine. Waking up in the middle of the afternoon, shopping for groceries, doing some chores. And dinner was starting to feel like lunch, and I had to start moving my meals around. I got really into various podcasts and YouTube channels, and I would sometimes sit for hours on end without having to do anything. And there were a few stumbles along the way, of course. Sometimes Lucas would slip, and I would have to guide him back to the treadmill. Other times he would roll out of bed on the wrong side. It was a bit of trial and error, but little by little it started to turn into an actual job. Sometimes we would go the entire day without talking, as Lucas would often be busy. But compared to how he had seemed when we first met, he was much better off now. Hallie told me that his hair had started growing back. It's gotta count for something. Still, though, I could never get over the way that he looked at night. Those white eyes were burned into my mind. And then there was this one night in late November. I had been working with Lucas for some time now, and we were getting used to the routine. It was a bit tricky to navigate a working social life, but I managed to make do with the time that I had. We had figured out a schedule where I was working every other weekend, rotating the days in a way that Lucas never had to take his sleeping pills more than 2 sessions in a row. And that particular night was nothing special at first glance. I had prepped the last episode of the podcast that I was going to listen to. I had charged my phone, and I had gotten a glass of that carrot juice from the fridge. Lucas had settled in for the night, and the treadmill was all set up and ready to go. As he started to drift off to sleep, he turned to me. "There's this dream," he said, "where I'm running through a field, just this endless meadow. I have all these friends and we're going home. It's the final day of school, the first day of summer. And that sounds wonderful." "It is," he smiled. It really is." He turned away and sighed. "It makes you want to run." As he fell asleep, I got ready to steer him towards the treadmill. I was waiting for the sit-up, the kneeling, and then the sprint. It was routine by then, but I still couldn't get over that unsettling feeling that I got when watching him move. It had given me countless sleepless hours. When he started to stir, I was already up on my feet, waiting by the treadmill. But I could tell that something was off. He was slower than usual, more deliberate. In a controlled motion, he sat up straight, his head hanging loose against his shoulder. For a few seconds, we just looked at one another. Those white eyes rolled back in his skull. I could see his chest rising and falling quickly, like a panting dog. He closed his jaw, straightened out his head, and looked right at me. "Hello." The way that he said it made me shudder. It was barely his own voice anymore. It sounded feminine, dripping with hatred. Lucas's body language shifted as he rolled his shoulders. "Release me," he continued. "And go back to sleep, Lucas." With a series of fluid motions, he stood up in the middle of the bed, those white eyes still fixated on me. I could feel that block of ice churning in my stomach. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't having a nightmare. It was right there, and it was something far beyond what we had planned for. "You run." He grabbed a glass of water from his nightstand and hurled it against the floor. In one movement, he got off the bed and swooped up the largest piece of broken glass, wielding it like a dagger. I wasn't waiting to find out what he was going for. I hurried out of the door, shut it behind me, and used the bolt that we had installed to lock him in. I heard a deep thud, followed by a sharp tapping as the broken glass pierced its way to the door frame. I realized that I had left my phone in the other room. The pounding on the door stopped, and I heard footsteps fading away into the distance. For a moment, I thought that it was over, and then I heard a loud crash. I only had a few seconds to react. There was this strange drowning sound coming from Lucas, and I could hear it from outside. I figured he had made his way out and was heading for the forest. But no, he was coming back inside. I heard approaching footsteps making their way through the kitchen. I considered my options. I could go into his bedroom, get my phone, and call for help. But no, the lock was on the outside of the door. He could make it inside long before help arrived. I could hide, but for how long? And where? No, there was only one real option. Running. I hurried down the stairs and headed straight for the front door. I knocked over a metallic urn on the way, along with a chair and a vase with a dry blue sunflower. I could hear Lucas gaining on me, dragging something sharp along the walls. I looked back, but only for a second. His hands were outstretched, as if coming in for a big embrace. He held his sharpest knife in his left hand, usually reserved for cutting oranges. It scraped against the wall, leaving a long, straight line in the wallpaper. His head was swinging haplessly side to side, again deemed useless by whatever force was pulling him forward. And those eyes were still white as death, accompanied by an absurd grin. Every other step I heard him spit out a growling, "Run!" at me. He was much faster but had little to no control over his movements. He kept bumping into things, stumbling and slipping. Every time I turned a corner, I gained a few seconds. But he was clever, and I couldn't just run circles around him. It felt like no matter what I did, those footsteps were coming closer. I decided to take a gamble. It had been particularly cold outside and the grass was slippery. He didn't have much traction with those rubber running shoes. I figured with enough twists and turns I could make him slip. I burst through the back door past the terrace and into the open grass. Lucas followed, repeating the same word over and over and over with every step. "Run, run, run." He ran out into the grass but quickly stopped. It was as if he realized he wouldn't be able to run out on the surface. So instead, he dropped to all fours, his head dangling like a bag of groceries. He didn't need to look at me. He knew exactly where I was. I turned to run, but it was already too late. He was gaining on me. I heard the gallop of hands and feet coming closer. And then nothing. A breath later, I was knocked to the ground. It felt like the world had turned on its head as he slammed into me. I fell hard, twisting my ankle in the process. I had the wind knocked out of me. For what felt like an eternity, I laid in the grass, counting my breaths. My mind was disassociating, forcing to imagine myself somewhere else, doing something different, something far away where the grass was warm and the air didn't hurt. But nothing happened. Looking to my right, I saw Lucas lying face down, having those micro seizures again. He had had a bad fall, and I could see the edge of the knife poking through his collarbone. He must have landed on it. "Lucas," I wheezed. "Are you?" No response. I couldn't even tell if he was breathing. In the faint light coming from the house, all I could see for certain was the edge of the blade. It was covered in red. I slowly got up on my knees. I kept holding my stomach, feeling like I was going to be sick. That block of ice felt heavier. I crawled over to Lucas. The second that I put my hand on his shoulder, there was a loud snap, but not from him. I turned towards the forest. There were no less than a dozen people staring at me. White eyes gleaming from loose-necked skulls. Men and women, young and old. "We," said one. "God," said another. "You," said a third. I turned to run, but I couldn't put any weight on my foot. Instead, I fell and was overcome with a dozen hands. One of them grabbed my hair, another my leg. They started pulling me away and dragging me into the forest, leaving Lucas to bleed out in his backyard. My screams echoed through the birch trees, rattling the leaves. I remember feeling bark against the palm of my hands and moss under my fingernails. There was nothing that I could do. The ice in my stomach exploded into a full-blown shiver as my body went into a panicked shock. At some point it stopped. I was pressed against the ground, deep in the woods. We were in a small clearing where something had broken the ground apart. There was a chasm ahead, at least 20 feet deep, and something down there was moving. My captors had surrounded me, but one of them stepped out to the edge of the chasm. In between my screams, I could hear my assailant talking. "Yes," it said. "We join." "Yo," groaned the others in unison. "We run. Yo. We are blameless. Yo." 4 of them pulled me up by the arms, holding me aloft like a scarecrow. All the fight had run out of me, leaving me panting and crying. I could barely see them. All the light from the house was far gone, and the moon was partly cloud-covered. And yet, even then, I could see the reflections in their white eyes. "An offering." Maybe Lucas was the intended offering. Maybe stopping him over and over made them consider another. I peered over the edge of the chasm and saw something stirring, ivory white and worm-like. A myriad of black spots in groups of 2, like 100 empty craniums looking up. "Eo," they chanted. "Eo." I felt a hand loosen in its grip as something eagerly stirred below. And then a gunshot. Lucas's shotgun was meant for hunting quail, not people. But that doesn't stop birdshot from packing one hell of a punch. As the abductor to my right took a blast to the solar plexus, he lost his grip on me and tumbled into the chasm. The white worms below massed into a frenzy. I could hear tearing, biting, and bones breaking as the mass of white turned into a pinkish red. They dropped me flat, and I started slipping downward. Putting weight on both my feet, even my wounded one, I managed to steady myself. But still, I was inches from completely losing myself. I heard another blast and flinched so bad that I nearly lost my grip. They scattered, running in all directions, laughing along the way. Dragging myself back up, I took one final look into the chasm. It was empty. We made our way back and we called for help. Turns out that accidentally stabbing yourself was enough to snap Lucas out of it. When he did, he had called for help and got his shotgun and followed my screams into the woods. Neither of us knew what was down there in that chasm. It used to be some sort of pond that had been drained, leaving this large hole in the middle of nowhere. We filed a report for an attempted abduction, but it was difficult to keep our story straight. I tried to tell it like it was, but Lucas had switched a few events around to make it more believable. When things stopped adding up, the police had chalked it up to some kind of home invasion gone wrong. There were no arrests. In a strange twist of fate, this somehow cured Lucas of his sleep running. He explained it like a deep-rooted feeling that whatever had been trying to lure him out had sort of lost interest. Maybe they were looking somewhere else, or figured he wasn't worth the trouble. But even now, long after the fact, I still have nightmares about it. I remember feeling so helpless, watching the world pass me by as I'm drawn deeper into the woods. And sometimes, according to my husband, I've started sleeping with my eyes open. and when I do, my eyes are white. Custodian. The official definition is a person who has responsibility for taking care of or protecting something. But that wasn't what I had in mind when I applied. I imagined that I would be pushing a mop bucket down vacant nighttime hallways, changing fluorescent bulbs in empty rooms, and performing simple maintenance on disjointed door hinges or leaky faucets. For the most part, that was exactly what the job entailed. But it wasn't all of it. Not by a long shot. There was one clue in the job description, but in my desperation for work, I passed over it without a second thought. Buried in the requirements was a single phrase: capable of working with an unusual schedule and conditions. I figured that they were referring only to the work hours, which were from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. It wasn't until I arrived for my interview that I gave a thought to what the second part of the phrase might even mean. The Cerulean Institute was located at the end of a shady, unmarked lane about 20 minutes outside of town. It was an ugly, bone-white structure perched atop a grassy hill that looked like it must have been murder to mow. I felt suddenly grateful that groundskeeping wasn't one of my responsibilities. Everything was clean, discreet, and obviously dripping with money. But even after I had walked into the lobby, I still wasn't quite sure what the place was for. The receptionist greeted me with a smile, buzzed me through a sleek, frosted glass door, and led me into a small office. I was pretty sure that the way her azure outfit matched the furniture was by no accident, and I was still wondering whether I was going to be expected to wear some cheesy, badly fitted uniform when a handsome, curly-haired man in a white lab coat knocked on the door. The man introduced himself as Dr. Narcy, and sleep, he told me, was his passion. He couldn't understand how other scientists could devote so much time and energy to studying the ocean depths or the void of space, when over a third of our own lives, our sleeping lives, remained a mystery. The best way to study sleep, Dr. Narcy informed me, was through the eyes of those who couldn't leave it. When he saw the confused expression on my face, he just flashed a bright, big-tooth smile and gestured for me to follow him. The sight of orderlies in pristine white scrubs and the heavy odor of disinfectant in the air had prepared me for something reminiscent of a hospital. But what I found was far more strange. Not a single patient at the Cerulean Institute was conscious. Everyone was in some sort of coma. Unlike other hospitals, where cries of pain blended with hushed doctor-patient conferences and the conversation of loved ones, this place seemed to be deathly calm. There were no intercom announcements, no gallows humor jokes being swapped between nurses on break. The quiet, Dr. Narcy explained, was important to ensure that no outside variables would interfere with the work that he and his fellow researchers were doing. I too would be expected to keep noise to a minimum. Looking out at all of those corpse-like figures hooked up to beeping machines in their anonymous sterile rooms was the closest that I came to backing out. The whole thing was just so eerie. At the time, though, I told myself that I was being foolish, throwing away the only job opportunity that I had found in months just because I had gotten goosebumps. It seemed like the stupidest thing that I could do. The thought reminded me that Dr. Narcy hadn't asked me any of the typical interview questions or gone over my resume at all. When I mentioned it, however, he just snorted. The Cerulean Institute had already thoroughly investigated my past, he had assured me. If there had been any doubts about my adequacy, I never would have even been allowed through the front doors. The only real question now was whether I felt comfortable carrying out my functions in such an environment. There had been problems in the past, he admitted, with employees who would succumb to their superstitions and quit unexpectedly. I forced out a laugh, trying to make it seem as though I hadn't been on the verge of bolting for the door and leaving all those blank wax museum faces behind me for good. Dr. Narcy didn't look very convinced by my false bravado, but he really did appear to appreciate the effort. He placed a large, tanned hand on my shoulder and guided me back to the reception desk to fill out the paperwork. I would have gotten a more accurate understanding of the place, I realized later, if my first visit had been at night. During the daytime, the patient-to-staff ratio was something like 1:5, but on the night shift, it was more like 1:16. And as if that weren't enough, the lighting was reduced to half strength after sunset. The doctors claimed that it was about maintaining natural sleep cycles, but I wondered whether the Cerulean Institute might just be trying to skimp out on the electrical bill a little bit. I mean, they were running a lot of machines, after all, and I had no idea what most of them were for. Either way, the combination of dim lighting and vacant spaces made the place a lot more disturbing after nighttime. And there was something else too. I soon discovered that entire wings would be marked off limits, sometimes for even days at a time. Later on, they would reopen as though nothing had happened, and another area would be shut down. I received notifications about the closures on the same clunky office software that provided my work tickets. Tasks like, unstick the window shutter room 204, or clean and disinfect storage area C. It's not like I needed them though. The electronically sealed doors and the blacked out windows made it obvious that I was meant to steer clear. Those odd changes in layout made everything take twice as long as it should have, and it gave me the unsettling sensation that I was wandering through a different facility each night. And just as Dr. Narcy had warned me, there was plenty in the Cerulean Institute to feel queasy about. From a scientific standpoint, I knew that the patients were all alive, but with their consciousness drowned deep in a place where the waking world couldn't reach, there was virtually no chance of any of them sitting up in bed with a wide-mouthed scream or reaching out to grab my wrist with cold, desperate fingers as I passed by. And yet a very unscientific part of me was certain that at any moment it might actually happen. Those long tile hallways with their softly beeping machines, and the rooms full of silent, waiting bodies. It became the new setting for my nightmares. In some of them, I was the one in the hospital bed, watching some stranger push a mop bucket down the hallway. I wanted to shriek, to reach out to them, to beg them to free me from the prison of my flesh. But I couldn't move even an eyelash. all I could do was listen to their footsteps fade away, like my hopes into the endless dark. The orderlies, however, didn't seem bothered by the place at all. The fear, it's like seasickness. An orderly named Jamie had told me one night, when we both caught each other sneaking a cigarette around back by the dumpsters. You either have it or you don't. Me, I sleep like a baby when I get home. They're just lumps of meat, man, you know. Don't let it get to you. Jamie was a big, stubbly bald guy with thick black glasses and a smoking habit that was even worse than mine. He had been at the Cerulean Institute for 3 years longer than anyone, it seemed. Well, there's the Institute, and then there's the Institute. Do you know what I mean? He told me when I asked what he had thought of the place. I mean, take a look at the doctors and nurses, Jamie suggested, and tell me tomorrow night if you've noticed anything different. I wasn't sure what the point of Jamie's game was, but I played along anyway. It was a way to pass the time, and sure enough, I did spot one small anomaly. About a fourth of the staff had small blue key cards hanging from a lanyard or stuffed into the front pocket of a lab coat. They kept the key cards in places where they could be seen without being conspicuous, a way, I supposed, of identifying one another. If you're gonna ask what that means, Jamie said when I reported back to him, you can save your breath. I've got no idea, man. He took a long, thoughtful drag of his cigarette. My guess is that there are 2 types of research that go on here. One official, above the board. The other, not so official. Am I curious? Well, sure I am. But you know what? This right here is a pretty okay gig. The pay's decent. You don't get exposed to bad weather or have to do much heavy lifting. And the customers, hey, they never complain. I'm not gonna risk it all just to scratch an itch. It wasn't so easy for me to forget about the closed down wings and the blue badges. They wove themselves seamlessly into the fabric of my nightmares. In my mind, I would find myself staring down the hallway at one of those locked doors. As I sighed and turned to push my cleaning cart, I would realize that the floor had begun to tilt slightly. The door flew open, revealing only blackness on the other side, and then lights began, one by one, to go out. I tried to run away, but I was never fast enough. The incline became steeper and steeper, until instead of running forward, I was falling backwards, swallowed by the polished tile throat of the Cerulean Institute, like some poor sea creature that had slipped between the jaws of an anglerfish. The dreams were getting worse too, but I didn't have them every single night, and I slowly came around to Jamie's point of view. I could put up with a little sleeplessness if that was what was needed to keep such a low-stress job, even if it was on the graveyard shift. Things might have gone on that way for years, if it hadn't been for what happened last Thursday night. I was replacing a leaky pipe in one of the restrooms when a low mechanical moan, like a tornado siren, began to echo throughout the facility. It wasn't the fire alarm, which I had tested before. This was something else, some other signal whose existence I hadn't been aware of until that moment. I poked my head out into the hallway. Jamie and 2 other orderlies were already there, looking just as confused as I was. But a thin blonde doctor that I had never seen before and one of the nurses were running as fast as they could. Both of them were holding the blue key cards. The rest of us looked at each other awkwardly. I cleared my throat and asked Jamie if this had ever happened before. "Never," he said, and shook his head. I told the little group that I would head to the front desk. Maybe there, I figured, I could find some hint of what was going on. I was so lost in my troubled thoughts that I nearly walked face first into the door at the end of the corridor. I had expected it to open when I pressed the push bar, but it didn't. I tried again, and this time there was no room for doubt. The door was sealed. Whatever that alarm meant, one of its effects had been to put us in lockdown. Only the people with the blue key cards, I realized, were still able to move freely throughout the institute. I looked around for a sign of what had changed, but I found nothing. I couldn't smell smoke or hear any storm. The night outside was black and still. The patients continued to sleep. What had I expected? That they would all suddenly sit up in bed with murder in their eyes when they had heard the alarm. That thought made me shudder. But we didn't appear to be in any danger. Not yet, at least. Jamie had begun rummaging through every cabinet and drawer that he could find. It took me a few minutes to realize what he was doing. He was searching for one of the blue key cards. I set down my tools and I went to help him. All the staff who had access to the key cards kept them close at all times, so I didn't have much hope. But we had to try something. I mean, what else could we do? Apart from waiting around and listening to that maddening noise. We ransacked the place like spies searching for some hidden documents, but no luck. Whatever secret the blue key cards concealed, it was hidden well. I leaned against the push bar of the locked door and I sighed. And then all the lights went out. The power outage, if that's what it was, didn't last more than a few disorienting and terrifying seconds. Many of the patients were on life support, and the Cerulean Institute had its own backup generators in case of an incident like this one, or so Dr. Narcy had told me. The emergency lights, however, were even dimmer than what I was used to, and their color was blood red. Once I had recovered from the initial shock, I realized something. The door that I was leaning on was slightly ajar. The circuit must have broken, just long enough for me to have pushed it open. I hesitated and then I opened it further. I wasn't sure what I was so afraid of. The hallway on the other side was identical to the one that I was standing in. There was no sign of anyone. Not even the thin blonde doctor or the blue card-holding orderlies. I took a few tentative steps forward, being sure to not let the door slam shut behind me. I doubted it would lock itself again from the inside, but there was no way to be sure. Halfway down the corridor, the hairs on the back of my neck all stood up at once. I heard, or maybe sensed, movement behind me, but when I turned around, the hallway was empty. It was like someone had snuck from one room to another behind my back, but why? The patients were all unconscious, and any other institute employee would have stopped and said something. My throat was dry and my palms were sweating, but I didn't dare go back to investigate. I needed to make it to the front desk and figure out what was going on. I kept checking over my shoulder as I walked, unable to shake the feeling that someone or something was there. I had almost reached the end of the hallway when I heard the door behind me, the one that I had left open just a crack, slam shut. "It's okay, just keep moving," I told myself, and then felt that confidence die as I took in the scene around the corner. The thin blonde doctor lay on the floor, her white lab coat stained with blood. I froze, squinting into the crimson gloom. The nurse was slumped, unmoving against the wall. The moment that I saw him, I knew I wouldn't be able to force myself to keep walking down that gruesome hallway. Instead, I stooped to pick up the blue key card that the blonde doctor had dropped. Closer up, I could see that her throat had been slashed with some rough instrument, maybe a piece of glass. More shards of it sparkled on the floor. I backed away slowly. I had to warn Jamie and the others, but first I had to get back alive. I mean, what had happened here? Was there some kind of break-in at the Institute? And if so, why? The sound of an agonized scream and a scuffle brought me back to reality. It was coming from the rear wing, where I had left Jamie and the others. Just as I had feared, the door had sealed itself, but I was able to open it again with the doctor's keycard. There was no sign of the other two orderlies, but Jamie was there, one hand pressed over a gruesome wound in his neck, the other wrapped around a cut in his belly. He was the one with medical experience, not me, but even I could see that we had to find some way to stop the bleeding. I flung open the wardrobe of the nearest room and grabbed the first thing that I found, a bedsheet, and then I hurried back to him. He was trying to speak, I realized, but his words couldn't make it past his gashed windpipe and the blood bubbling down his throat. The alarm overhead blared on. Jamie went pale. His eyes slid out of focus. His knees gave out when I tried to lower him to the floor. It was only then, with the sheet tamping down his wound, that I was able to understand what he was trying to say. "Behind you." The bald, barefoot stranger was wearing the same blue hospital gown as the rest of the patients, but she was no sleepwalker. Her eyes were wide with fury and pain. A shard of broken glass gleamed between her bony fingers. I threw up my hands, knowing all along that I was already too late. And then she hesitated. "You're not a doctor," the young woman rasped. Her voice was hoarse and her words uncertain, as though she hadn't spoken in years. She was probably in her early 20s, but she already had the pale, atrophied look that most of the Institute's patients seemed to take on eventually. I could see the EEG marks on her head and the IV hookup in her arm. She must have ripped herself free of it in a hurry. Only some kind of insane desperation could have given her the strength to do what she had done to the others. I pointed to my badge. I'm a custodian. You've got to get me out of here." I looked from Jamie, who was bleeding out before my eyes, to the shard of glass in the girl's hand. She had killed my friend and who knew how many others. But now that she had lost the element of surprise, I could probably overpower her. Wasn't that the right thing to do? Tackle her before she could hurt anybody else, and then call the authorities. Something held me back. "What's your name?" I asked. A blank look crossed her face. She didn't remember. "Call me Eve," she said slowly and then lowered the shard of glass. You don't really understand what goes on here, do you, Mr. Custodian? I realized that she was shivering. I returned to the wardrobe that I had thrown open. There was gauze, disinfectant, and a thicker blanket that I wrapped around her shoulders. Somewhere around the corner, a door burst open. Eve's eyes grew wide with fear. I rushed her to the open wardrobe, helped her inside, and shut the door. I returned to the hallway just in time to see Dr. Narcy and the two missing orderlies barreling down the hallway. Both of the orderlies held tasers, but Dr. Narcy was armed with a pistol. "Where is she?" he panted. I asked him what he meant, grateful that the fear and confusion on my face was genuine. One of the patients, Dr. Narcy explained, had woken up and become violent. Such things had happened before, but this time the nurse on duty had been taken by surprise. She was armed and dangerous, and needed to be apprehended as quickly as possible for everybody's safety, including her own. And Dr. Narcy's description of the night's events made perfect sense, but why did it sound like a lie? "I hadn't seen anyone," I answered. I had been working on a leaky pipe when I had heard a ruckus in the hallway. When I had come out to investigate, I had found Jamie lying half dead against the wall. Dr. Narcy studied my face carefully. I had a nasty feeling that he knew that I was hiding something, but there was no time to do anything about it now. His patient was still on the loose. Warning me to stay put, Dr. Narcy and his orderlies advanced toward the locked hallway, where the blonde doctor and several others lay dead. As soon as they checked it, I knew that they would be back. After the doors slammed shut behind them, I returned to Eve. She was curled up in the corner of the wardrobe, her improvised weapon at the ready. When she saw that it was me, she lowered the shard of glass and sighed. I fiddled nervously with the blue key card in my hand, my mind racing. Now that I had it, I could go anywhere in the facility. So what was the quickest way out of here? How could I get Eve to the authorities, the real authorities, without being stopped by anyone who worked for Cerulean? "I've got an idea," I told Eve, "but you're not gonna like it." The long rectangular cart that I pushed around for work had a little bit of everything. A shelf for cleaning supplies, a shelf for tools, another that held replacements for expendable goods like toilet paper, and an enormous black trash bag in the back. It was more than large enough for someone of Eve's size to climb into. And fortunately, I hadn't collected any garbage yet that evening. I would have a hard time explaining what I was doing pushing my cart around during a lockdown, but only if Dr. Narcy had told the remaining staff in the building what was going on, and I had a sneaking suspicion that he hadn't. "I can't believe this is happening," Eve muttered from inside the cart's trash receptacle a few minutes later. "It's like a bad dream," I offered. "Don't you dare say those words like you know what they mean," Eve snarled, suddenly furious. I glanced around nervously. If anybody heard, we were done for. There weren't many people on the graveyard shift, but I should have run into somebody by now. Where was everybody? Hiding? Crouched down with their heads against the wall like students in a tornado drill? Or did Dr. Narcy have them all out searching for us as well? That's what they study here, you see. Bad dreams. How to create them. How to control them. You know how certain sound frequencies can affect people's moods, right? Make them feel fear or awe. Even make them hallucinate. The researchers here are trying to do the same thing. But while you sleep, I doubt that any of the people you're seeing are really in a coma. Like me, they're probably being kept unconscious with drugs, and then woken up periodically to check their T rating. T rating? I asked. Terror rating. They want you to wake up screaming gibberish and frothing at the mouth. They want you to be so scared that you don't even know who you are. That's the goal. But why? I was suddenly skeptical. It all sounded so far-fetched. What if Dr. Narcy was right and this Eve really was some kind of dangerous escapee? Why would anyone want to do such a thing? Think of the possibilities. Eve snorted in disgust. Imagine you work for a 3-letter agency or some kind of corporate operation, and you need to get someone to talk. Imagine you want to completely wipe their brain or even reprogram them. With the technology that they're building here, you could do it overnight. And everybody's got to sleep eventually. Wait, how did you get here then? I wondered out loud. The last thing I remember, I was in the back of my parents' car, going to the dentist's office to have my wisdom teeth removed. But that was, 3 years ago now. They probably told my family that I never woke up from the anesthesia. They probably asked them to donate the body to science to make sure the same thing didn't happen to somebody else's kid. Oh, you don't believe me? Check the medical files. I bet you won't find any car crashes, concussions, or rare diseases. Just blank charts and fake names. People whose doctors sold them to this horrible place for a price. And you've been a part of it. Eve didn't say the words, but I heard them in the aftermath of her explanation, echoing through the hallways along with the deafening alarm and the squeaking of the cart's right front wheel. It was so loud that I didn't hear the nurse running up behind me until it was too late. "What are you doing?" the young man shouted. "Can't you see that we're in a lockdown?" I put on my best dumb custodian face and scratched my chin. I don't know. Nobody told me nothing about it. I was just heading back up front to put my card away. The nurse rolled his eyes and huffed. "Just stay out of her way, okay?" He stomped off down the hallway without another look back. He hadn't noticed the unusual bulk inside the black trash bag, or how my knuckles were white on the cart's push bar. It had worked. We were almost through. Up ahead were the 2 final doors, the ones that led through the office hallway, where I had been interviewed by Dr. Narcy, what felt like forever ago. The offices were all shuttered and dark. None of the administrative staff worked the night shift. Eve shuffled slightly in her hiding place, eager to break free. I shushed her and I backed out into the lobby. I had never been tased before, and at first I didn't know what was happening. It was like being punched in the neck by a lightning bolt, and I went down hard, barely aware of Eve's screams as she kicked and struggled. And Dr. Narcy and the orderlies had been waiting in the lobby, and of course they were. The tall, narrow windows were too tight to climb through, and even the emergency exits had been sealed off. This was the only real way out of the Cerulean Institute, and they must have known that the escapee would have to pass through it eventually. "You should have thought about the security cameras before you lied," Dr. Narcy hissed into my ear, while the orderlies fought to pin my hands behind my back. "Oh, but it's too late now. I'm going to enjoy putting you through our program." Maybe it was the prospect of being sent into the hell that Eve had just described which gave me the strength to slip free. Then again, maybe it was just the filthy water of the mop bucket that had sloshed onto the floor during the struggle. I slipped through the orderly's arms and flung my weight into the cart, slamming it into our attackers. The result was a grunt, a curse, and a high-pitched shriek. I couldn't see where Eve was in all the chaos, but it sounded like she had recovered her shard of sharpened glass. I stumbled to my feet and tried to get my bearings. There was Eve running toward the front exit to the parking lot. I already knew she wouldn't be able to open it, not without the blue key card around my neck. The second orderly crashed into me trying for a tackle, but I was still able to slide the card across the floor to Eve. "Stop her," Dr. Narcy yelled. The orderly's hesitation was just the break that I needed to sprint for the wide open door. They hadn't signed up for any of this any more than I had, and like me, they were probably starting to have their doubts about the gun-toting Dr. Narcy's orders. The air outside tasted like nighttime, damp grass, parking lot asphalt, and freedom. My truck was just ahead, the dew in its windshield sparkled in the glow of the parking lot lights. Eve gripped my hand as we ran. We were going to make it. The shot rang out just as I was reaching for the driver's side door. As soon as I had heard it, I knew that it wasn't meant for me. Eve's fingers slipped through my own, and I only got the briefest look at what the bullet had done to her head, but it was enough to make the vomit rise in my throat. I scrambled into my truck, keeping my head down as I turned the key in the ignition and reversed, but there were no more shots. No one was targeting me because there was no need to. Eve was the only first-hand witness, the only one who could have proven what was really going on here. I was a nobody who had worked at the Institute for just a few weeks. No one would believe what I had to say, and even if they did, I was willing to bet that whoever was funding the Cerulean Institute had ways of making the story disappear. They had murdered her to keep her quiet, and there was no doubt that they would do the same thing to me. I drove home barely aware of what I was doing, and as soon as I was through the front door, I made directly for the shower. I screamed into the torrent of hot water. I needed to let everything go, to wash away this horrible night and plan my next move. I thought about the gas cans in the bed of my truck, and the fact that unless someone had changed the locks, I still had access to the Cerulean Institute. I could burn this nightmare to the ground once and for all. I slept for 12 hours, and when I woke up, only my injuries convinced me that it hadn't all been some horrible dream. There were no calls from my former employer, nothing to indicate that any of it had happened at all. It made sense from the Cerulean Institute's perspective. The less evidence, the better. I spent all that afternoon steeling myself for what I was about to do. At best, I'd be likely to face prison time, and I had just as many chances of winding up in a shallow grave on that grassy hillside or plugged into one of Dr. Narcy's nightmare machines. Still, I couldn't spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. I had to act, no matter how horrible the consequences might be. I owed it to Eve. My Maps app showed me that there was a golf course on the other side of the woods that ringed the Cerulean Institute. I made my way there an hour before sundown and parked in an out-of-the-way spot that I hoped was close to my destination. I had forgotten how disorienting walking through truly pathless forest could be. Even just moving straight ahead was a challenge. By dusk, however, I had reached the south side of the hill. I squatted down in the undergrowth, watching. But something was wrong. The windows of the Cerulean Institute were dark, and there wasn't a single car in the parking lot. With a sinking feeling in my gut, I threw aside caution and jogged up to the main entrance. The doors opened easily to my keycard, but there was no one at the reception desk. The offices, too, were empty. From the strange equipment to the patients, the entire facility had been gutted. Raising it to the ground now would do nothing but create a minor inconvenience for an insurance company. Dr. Narcy and his backers had moved everything overnight. But their experiment wasn't over. In a different place under a different name, I know that the Cerulean Institute is still carrying on its twisted research. Maybe right now some clueless working stiff like me is pushing his mop bucket down its silent hallways. Maybe right now somebody's going in for a routine surgery, unaware that they'll never see their friends or family again. Unaware that they're about to spend the rest of their life trapped in an endless nightmare. My earliest memory happened when I was 5 years old, and it was terrifying. The sound of heavy footsteps woke me in the middle of the night, sometime around 3 a.m. I slipped out of bed thinking that my dad was getting a midnight snack from the fridge, maybe an ice cream cookie. As I crept downstairs, I heard a clicking sound and saw the shadow of a hulking man appear on the carpeted living room floor. Click. The shadow vanished into darkness. Click. The shadow reappeared. Click. It vanished again. "Dad?" I called out. No answer. "Dad?" It must be an intruder, I thought. I considered going back to bed, but my parents' room was downstairs and I really wanted to wake them. Maybe the intruder wouldn't see me if I walked super slow and quiet. When I got to the foot of the stairs, I felt a rush of relief. "Uncle Virgil!" My uncle had been staying with us for the Christmas holiday. He was a quiet, gentle man who always gave good presents. He stood by the front door in his silk pajamas, his body shrouded in shadow. "Uncle Virgil?" I asked. "What are you doing up?" My uncle didn't respond. He just stood by the front door, his back turned towards me. "Are you okay?" I asked, moving closer. Uncle Virgil still didn't turn around. Instead, he flicked the light switch, click, filling the room with blinding brightness. Before I could ask him to turn it off, click, he flipped the switch again, plunging us back into darkness. I laughed nervously. "What are you doing?" I asked as I crept closer. Uncle Virgil kept flipping the light switch. The constant shift from bright to dark and back again was disorienting. I thought it might be some sort of trick. It made me angry. "Come on, this isn't funny. Stop it," I nearly shouted. Just before my uncle went to flip the light back on, I grabbed his arm. He finally turned around to face me and I saw his eyes. They were wide open but glazed and unfocused, like he really wasn't looking at anything. I jumped back in alarm. "Are you okay?" My uncle didn't look down at me. His eyes just stared ahead into emptiness. And then he spoke with a voice that I had never heard him use before. It was almost like a child's voice, even though he was a middle-aged man at the time. "The kaleidoscope man is coming," he said. "What?" A second later, my uncle grabbed my arms and screamed, his eyes still unfocused. "The kaleidoscope man! The kaleidoscope man!" He kept screaming this as tears rolled down his cheeks. By this point, my parents were up. They rushed into the living room and pulled us apart. "Virgil!" my father shouted. "Wake up!" He slapped his brother. Uncle Virgil's eyes finally focused on his surroundings. He blinked, looking around confused. His voice returned to normal as he said, What's everybody doing?" "You were doing it again," my father said, annoyed. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Uncle Virgil said, looking down at me. His eyes were soft and caring now. "I hope I didn't scare you, Nathan." I was scared shitless. And despite my fear, the whole experience eventually led to my profession. It turned out my uncle was sleepwalking and having a night terror. Virgil had been suffering from these sleep disorders for at least 10 years by then. Like every other time, he had no memory of the incident and no idea what the kaleidoscope man meant either. I asked my uncle about it later. "Oh, people who do this sometimes say weird things that don't make sense," Uncle Virgil told me. "It's just nonsense, it didn't mean anything." My uncle lived a hard life. Not long after this incident, he shot himself. I didn't find out the truth until years later. For the longest time, my parents told me that he had passed away in his sleep from a stroke. Little did I know that Uncle Virgil rarely, if ever, got a whole night's sleep. He had worked at a physics lab called Particle 1 when he was younger, and he was the only survivor of an explosion at the facility. Someone at the lab had accidentally overloaded the electrical system, causing a massive power surge on the 4th floor where Virgil and 20 others were working. All of them died in the initial blast, except for my uncle. He was the only one inside a lead-lined storage room when it had happened. Even though the event didn't physically harm Virgil's body, it left him permanently disabled and battling a host of issues, from severe tinnitus to PTSD and survivor's guilt, and these in part led to numerous sleep disorders, like those that nearly made me crap my pants that cold December night when I was 5. As I grew older, I researched parasomnia such as sleepwalking, and I grew obsessed with them. I read everything from Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams to Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, to countless Reddit posts where people describe their most vivid nightmares. I received my A-step from the American Academy of Sleep Medicine and eventually became certified as a polysomnographic technologist. Basically, I worked with doctors to evaluate and treat sleep disorders by conducting and analyzing overnight sleep studies. I worked at a place called Sunset Labs in a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia. It was a small, windowless medical office with a monitoring room, a bathroom, and 3 bedrooms. I typically saw 3 patients a night, ranging in age from 8 to 89. I worked 5 nights a week from 8 p.m. to 7 a.m., sleeping or trying to sleep during the day. My friends joked that I was a vampire. Sometimes I wondered if I was becoming one. I didn't have a wife or kids, and I didn't even have a girlfriend. My profession wasn't all that conducive to a healthy romantic relationship, but still I loved my job. I was obsessed with trying to understand the mysteries of our subconscious life. We still know so little about something that takes up a third of our existence, and my work helped thousands of people get a better night's sleep. I defeated many boogeymen plaguing children's nightmares. I saved people's sanity. I saved marriages. I helped save lives. Honestly, I would have continued my work until my dying day were it not for one patient. They arrived at 8:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. I met the father first. He reminded me of an accountant, very by the book. The man was bleary-eyed, still in his drab office attire and carrying a duffel bag. "Hi, I'm Austin. Is this the sleep place?" he asked. "Yeah, I'm Nathan," I said. "I'll be running the sleep study and you're the patient." "Oh no, it's for my daughter, Jackie." At that moment, a 16-year-old girl entered the front office. If her father looked sleep-deprived, this girl was phantom-like from insomnia. "Jackie, introduce yourself," her father said. "Hi." Jackie barely looked up from her iPhone as she spoke. She had a goth vibe, dressed in all black pajamas, jet black hair, and bangs that almost covered her eyes. I could see the stress bubbling behind her pale face. She was holding in a lot of anxiety. "Sorry for whatever havoc I might wreak tonight," she said. "Oh, that's okay, I'm all rested and ready to handle anything that comes my way," I said. This wasn't quite true. At that time, I had been suffering from mild insomnia. I kept waking up from a nightmare. I couldn't remember what it was about, but it always left me drenched in sweat and wide-eyed, clutching a pillow to my chest. Afterwards, I struggled to fall back asleep. Let me show you both to your rooms. I gave Austin and Jackie a quick tour of the facility. Jackie was my only patient for the night. She would be staying in room number 1 with all the sleep study equipment, while her father slept in room 2. It's required for a parent or parental guardian to stay overnight when the patient is a minor. If there's anything you need, I'll be right across the hall. Austin told his daughter as he set his stuff down. You should get a full night's sleep for once, Jackie told her dad. I'm sure the doctor here can handle it. I'll let you know if I need any help, I told Austin. And I'm not actually a doctor. I'm a polysomnographist. A poly what? I explained my job as I led Jackie into her room. I'm going to place a series of devices on you that will study you while you sleep. A shelf full of monitoring equipment lay next to the bed, all of which was needed for a complete analysis. Once Austin had entered the room dressed in his pajamas, I began my setup. I started by applying an O2 sensor to Jackie's finger. This will measure your oxygen levels while you sleep, I explained, and then I gave Jackie a belt to place on her chest just beneath her breasts. What's this one do? That's an EKG for your heart rate, I said. Oh, she's been waking us up every night screaming, Austin explained. Sometimes she's up and moving around, slamming cupboard doors or babbling nonsense. Will these gadgets tell me what's wrong? Jackie asked. I can't diagnose your problem, I said. That's for your primary care physician. But these monitors, along with my analysis, will provide your full sleep architecture, so Dr. Richard can hopefully figure out what's going on. A sleep architecture. It's what we call the pattern and duration of different sleep stages throughout the night, I explained. My doc says that I have a lot of parasomnias, Jackie said. I used to sleep just fine. When did these parasomnias start? I asked, looking at her father. I placed an oxygen cannula around Jackie's face, sticking in tubes into her nostrils. This will check your breathing. They started about a month ago, Austin said, but they've been getting worse each week. It used to only happen once a night, but now she'll get up 4 or 5 times at least, sleepwalking or screaming or both. My wife and I often find her messing with the light switches. I looked up at Austin, intrigued. Turning them on and off. Yeah, Austin said. I bet you haven't seen anyone as messed up as me, Jackie said. Jackie, her father admonished her. Oh, I've seen plenty of strange cases, I said as I affixed a snoring sensor to Jackie's neck and EMG sensors to her legs and chin to measure muscle movement and tension. People with sleep paralysis, that's where you're awake but unable to move. I've seen folks who act out their dreams. It's most common in men over 50. I've even seen exploding head syndrome. That's where a loud sound snaps you awake. The noise isn't coming from the outside world, but from inside your head. Some people hear cymbals crashing, others hear an explosion. And Jackie looked nervous as I rattled off the numerous horrors of our subconscious mind. So did her father. And the point is, what you're experiencing is nothing new, I said, smiling. We'll be able to capture it and find a way to get you back to a good night's rest. I grabbed a tangle of wires with electrodes on their ends. Okay, now I'm going to paste these little sensors all over your scalp. Don't worry, the paste will come out the next time you shower. What are they for? An EEG, I explained. These will measure your brainwaves so that we can see what sleep stage you're in. Like if I'm dreaming or not. Exactly. As I began the long process of placing the electrodes on Jackie's scalp, I decided to change the subject. What are you studying in school? Mostly boring shit, Jackie said. Austin gave his daughter another daggered stare for the cursing. But I'm in AV Club, which is really cool. They have an old red camera that we can borrow for our projects, Jackie said. Her YouTube channel is really popular, Austin said. She's got 1 million followers. Oh, it's more like a few 100,000. Wow, that's still really impressive, I said. I don't think I've ever received more than 12 likes on something that I posted online. What's the channel called? Urbex Chicks, Jackie said, offering no further information. It's her and a few other girls who do short documentaries on abandoned places in the Atlanta area, her father chimed in. They go through the history of each site and why it closed. She started it for a school project, isn't that right? Yeah, Jackie said. Very cool, I remarked. She's super talented, Austin said proudly. One day you'll be seeing my daughter win Best Documentary at the Oscars. Dad, Jackie said, irritated. I'll have to check it out sometime, I said as I finished affixing the electrodes. Don't forget to like and subscribe, Austin said. Dad! Now Jackie was really annoyed. What, isn't that what you always say? Yeah, but like 1 million times less lame. Okay, these go right beside your eyes, I told Jackie, holding out 2 electrodes. They'll check when you're in REM sleep, and do you know what that is? When I have nightmares, Jackie asked. Well, it's when you dream. I don't have dreams anymore, only nightmares. She wakes up screaming, her father offered. Do you ever remember these nightmares? I asked. No, Jackie said softly. It seemed like she had shrunk back into her shell in the last 30 seconds. I just remember feeling really anxious. Well, if you have any nightmares tonight, I'm going to come in and wake you up, I said, and I'll ask you what you were dreaming about, while it's still fresh in your mind. Maybe we'll be able to figure out what's giving you such a hard time. Okay, thanks. And one last thing. I pointed to a security camera high on the wall facing the bed. That camera is going to record you through the whole night, okay? So I'll be able to see if you're sleepwalking or have night terrors, or any other disturbances. If you do, I'll come in and make sure that you get safely back into bed. And your father will be right across the hall if you're ever scared or need him for anything, okay? Jackie nodded. She looked tense, staring at the bed as if it were a dark cave. Now just get comfortable, or as comfortable as you can with all these wires on you. I know they're a bit much, I explained. Your father and I are going to leave the room now. You can read or listen to music for a bit to relax, but I would like you to turn the lights out and try to get some sleep by no later than 9:45 or 10. Okay? Sure. Jackie looked at her father worried. You look like a cyborg with all those wires, Austin said, trying to lighten the mood. Jackie smirked, pretending to be one of the Borg from Star Trek. You will assimilate. Austin laughed. Jackie handed him her cell phone. Here, get a picture of me. Austin took a series of photos while I returned to the monitoring station to ensure that all the sensors were capturing data. The station consisted of 3 separate computer screens, 2 of which displayed a series of graphs tracking all of Jackie's sleep architecture. Heart rate, O2, eye movement, muscle tension, etc. While the third showed the night vision CCTV feed. The graphs were simple, consisting of lines that ran continuously across the screen with occasional peaks or valleys. At least that's how they looked to the average person. But to my trained eyes, those graphs might as well have been a 3D picture of the sleeper. I had become so attuned to all the little fluctuations that I didn't even need to check the camera feed to know what sleep stage my patient had entered, or what parasomnia they were experiencing. By 9:30, Jackie was alone in the dark, reading something on her phone while lying in bed. Her heart rate had dropped to 64 beats per minute. Her muscles had relaxed and her eyelids appeared heavy. The EEG showed her brainwaves slowing down. She was entering N1, the first stage of sleep. This transition usually takes between 10 and 20 minutes. When I checked the night vision camera a few minutes later, Jackie's phone had fallen flat on her chest as her hand released it. She was officially asleep. The first couple of hours were perfectly normal. Jackie's readings couldn't have been any better. Her heart rate, breathing, and brainwaves showed that she had entered a state of deep sleep, right on schedule. Perhaps the family's parasomnia worries were overblown. Plenty of my previous patients believed their condition was far worse than it really was. As the time dragged on, I plopped my personal laptop onto the desk beside the sleep study monitors and I checked my email. The monitoring system would alert me if any anomalous readings began to appear. I don't know when exactly, but at some point I opened up YouTube. I often listened to chill music playlists from the site on my headphones while I worked. As if the algorithm had been listening to my earlier conversation, I noticed a suggested video from Jackie's YouTube channel, Urbex Chicks, on the main page. It was titled Abandoned Mental Asylum. Oddly enough, somebody had posted the video only 2 hours earlier. It had 0 views. And curious, I clicked on it. The video was about an abandoned psychiatric hospital called Long Pines Mental Asylum, high in the Appalachian Mountains north of Atlanta. Jackie narrated its history as a series of old photos scrolled across the screen in a Ken Burns-style documentary. The hospital was a massive brick structure, built in the style of an old English manor complete with tall bay windows and Gothic stonework. It had a nice view of the forested valley below. Long Pines began as a convalescent home for people suffering from consumption in the 1890s, and later took on patients with various mental illnesses. It remained a working psychiatric facility for almost a century, finally closing its doors in 1998 due to budget cuts and a lack of patients. The cost to maintain such a remote facility was too great for most people to afford, and the grants that they had relied on for decades had finally dried up. Afterwards, many companies tried to turn Long Pines into a luxury hotel. All failed. Most projects fell through due to financial mismanagement, leading many to believe that the site was cursed. Others believed it was haunted. Some would-be developers complained about strange noises in the building, including a scraping sound within its crumbling walls, an errant scream from the basement, and the persistent feeling of being watched when inside its cavernous hallways. The Discovery Channel and the History Channel aired ghost hunting episodes dedicated to the Long Pines, and many YouTubers had also visited it. To date, no one has ever found any evidence of a true haunting, Jackie said in the video. From her narration, it was clear that she was a paranormal skeptic, and the supposed ghosts that people claimed to see were never even patients, much less died there. The second half of the video showed Jackie at Long Pines in the present day, while one of her high school friends filmed her. They visited the building in broad daylight, the sun shining brightly overhead, but even then the place exuded an eerie creepiness. "It's like a big sore on the mountain," the camera person said. "Makes my skin crawl just looking at it." "Oh, I know, it's wonderful," Jackie said. "Let's get some shots of me walking around it." The camera followed Jackie as she toured Long Pines' exterior. The asylum was a skeletal relic of its former self. All its doors and windows were boarded up, its roof half caved in, and thick green vines covered its brick walls like some kind of giant fungal infection. "It's weird," Jackie said, staring at the decaying structure. "This place, it feels familiar, almost like I've been here before." Uh-oh, is the famous skeptic having a haunted experience? Jackie laughed. "Hardly. Ooh." She stopped by the back entrance. "Look at that. Someone or something had pulled a few boards loose, exposing a dark passageway into the building. Zoom in there." Jackie pointed excitedly to the opening. The camera zoomed in but revealed nothing more than pitch blackness. "I'll give you $100 to film in there," Jackie said, "even if it's just for a few seconds." "Are you crazy?" her friend said. "I wouldn't do that for $1,000. Besides, they said we could only film the outside. Okay, fine, give me the camera, Jackie said. No, wait, what are you planning? Just give me it. Jackie snatched the camera and the view suddenly shifted. If we want our videos to go viral, we have to be willing to take some risks. Jackie crouched down until she was level with the dark hole. The entrance was just big enough for her to squeeze through. I could hear a friend pacing with worry nearby. Jackie, wait. On screen, Jackie's hand brushed aside some hanging vines, and then she entered the beeping. I paused the video and looked up from my laptop. Jackie's sleep readings had shifted dramatically in the last few seconds. Heart rate up, increased muscle tension, rapid oxygen intake. Her brain waves were spiking too. And then I checked the night vision camera feed. Jackie was out of bed facing the nightstand. She kept turning the bedside lamp on and off, on and off. Her eyes appeared open but unfocused, and clearly sleepwalking. I got up and rushed down the hall to Jackie's room, gingerly opening the door so as to not startle her. Jackie was still flipping the lamp on and off as I crept into the room. The constant change in light was disorienting. My eyes never had a chance to adjust to the gloom, and I kept getting momentarily blinded when Jackie turned the lamp back on. Click, click, click. Jackie, I said in a soft but commanding voice. Jackie, wake up. The girl showed no response. She stared at the wall blankly as she continued turning the lamp off and on. Jackie, I walked towards her at a slow and measured pace. Jackie, it's time to wake up. Still no response. Jackie's eyes never shifted and never found their focus. She didn't even blink. I was almost on top of her now. The lamplight was blinding. How was it not affecting her eyes? I wondered. You should always be gentle when waking a sleepwalker. You don't want to disorient or upset them. It could make the situation worse. Jackie, I reached out my hand. It's time to wake up. As soon as my fingertips brushed her shoulder, Jackie's eyes found me. There was something off about her stare, like she was staring through me rather than at me. He's coming, she whispered, breathing heavily. Who? Jackie mumbled a response, too faint to decipher. I moved closer. Who's coming? The kaleidoscope man! The kaleidoscope man! I jumped back, nearly falling to the floor. Jackie kept screaming as Austin rushed into the bedroom, flipping on all the lights. What's happening? She's having a night terror, I shouted over the screams. Austin and I grabbed a hold of Jackie's arms, trying to calm her down. Jackie, come back to us, honey. Seconds later, Jackie's screams ceased and her eyes shut. She coughed a bit, her voice was hoarse from all the shouting. What? Jackie looked up at her father and me, wiping tears from her cheeks. Oh no, I did it again, didn't I? It's okay, honey, Austin said. You're safe now, everything's okay. Do you remember anything that just happened? I asked. No, Jackie said, confused. What was I doing? You were flipping the lamp on and off again, I said. And then when I tried to wake you, you mentioned something about a kaleidoscope man. Kaleidoscope man? She's mentioned that before, Austin said. He looked at me worried. Do you think it means anything? What? No, it's just the subconscious firing off random information. It's meaningless. A night terror vocalization. Because you look kind of strange when she said that just now, Austin said. Said what? Sweat beaded on my forehead and my pulse quickened. The thing about the kaleidoscope man. It's like you recognized it or something, Jackie said. Both of them were staring at me now. Do they know something that I don't? I wondered. Did I mention Uncle Virgil and his night terrors earlier? It's just, I hadn't heard that one before, I said. It caught me off guard. Austin turned to his daughter. "You need to get back to sleep, honey." "Yeah, I know." Jackie looked worried. Austin and I helped her lie back down, adjusting the wires from the monitoring devices so that she'd be more comfortable in the bed. People who suffered from night terrors were usually worried about going back to sleep, especially children, but Jackie's level of fear was worse than any that I had ever seen before. "It'll be okay," I told her. "Your father and I are right here. We'll make sure that you don't accidentally hurt yourself." "It's not me that I'm worried about hurting," Jackie said. "What if I do something to someone else?" She looked up at her father. Austin choked back tears. I could tell this whole mess was killing him, being unable to help his baby girl. He stroked Jackie's hair. "You could never." "Can you stay here for a bit?" she asked. "It'll help me relax." "Sure." We stayed by the bed for another 10 minutes. I turned the lamplight low and it barely illuminated the room, casting most of it in a deep purple shadow. We were quiet. Jackie lay on her side, breathing deeply while Austin held her hand. She finally started to relax. I noticed her jaw slacken and she was asleep again. Austin returned to his bedroom, while I turned off the lamp and went back to the monitoring station. Jackie's graphs were all normal when I arrived back at my desk, and they indicated that she would soon enter REM sleep at the time of dreaming. Her eyelid monitor was already spiking. Hopefully she wouldn't have any nightmares. Her night terror, like all night terrors, occurred during non-REM sleep at stage 4, the deepest and most restorative stage. Stage 4 is a time when the brain and body are almost completely turned off, the closest that we come to death in our sleep. Technically, Jackie wasn't having a nightmare when she got up and started messing with the lamp. And yet, when she had mentioned the kaleidoscope man, it was like she was remembering something she had just seen. Something vivid. Something from a nightmare. In my experience, people just mumbled incoherently, screamed, and even grunted while having night terrors. The only other time I had heard somebody speak so clearly was that night that I found Uncle Virgil, and he used those exact words. I must have told Jackie about my uncle, I thought, probably when she was talking about her previous parasomnia experiences. It's the only way to explain such a unique term tied to my past, but I couldn't remember ever mentioning it. And years after my uncle's suicide, I had asked my father more about Virgil's strange behavior during his night terrors, particularly that term, the kaleidoscope man. "Do you have any idea where he could have gotten that from?" I had asked. "Oh, your uncle suffered a traumatic brain injury," my father had told me. "And that can cause people to say or do things that make no sense even when they're completely awake." And when we had first visited Virgil in the hospital after the explosion, he couldn't really communicate. We'd ask him a simple question like, "Do you want some water?" And he would respond with a weird phrase like, "The river flows only upward." We could tell that he was trying to communicate, but the words were coming out all wrong. One of the things he said most often was the kaleidoscope man. "Does that hurt, Virgil? The kaleidoscope man hurts," he would say. "Can you squeeze your right hand for me, Virgil?" He would stare at the nurse and respond, "Tight, tight, the kaleidoscope man, tight." No one knew the origin of the term. Doctors suggested it was something from his early childhood, like a cartoon character. But I watched all the same cartoons with him, and I don't ever remember one called that. Maybe it was something from his work. I had asked my father. No, none of his coworkers recognized it either. But I thought that all of his coworkers died in the explosion. Well, his immediate coworkers, yes, but there were plenty of other people who worked on other floors at that physics lab, and they knew about the work that Virgil's team was doing. It had nothing to do with kaleidoscopes or prisms or anything like that. What were they working on? I'd asked. They were experimenting with something called quantum nodules, I think, trying to find a new state of matter. It all sounded like Greek to me, my father had said. As I grew older, I looked up the place where Uncle Virgil worked, Particle 1. I read every online article that I could find about the research facility, from Wikipedia to scholarly journals to random Reddit posts. They said the lab had studied phenomena such as electron diffraction, atomic spectra, and quantum tunneling, whatever those meant. But there was one field of study that stood out. It was never confirmed, just a rumor posted on message boards. The rumor was that Particle 1 was trying to produce dark matter via a high-energy collider, a machine that pushes particles to their very limits. Supposedly, this experiment caused the explosion that blew up the 4th floor, the one Virgil had barely survived. Some Redditors even claimed it had ripped a hole in the fabric of reality, letting some kind of dark energy slip silently into our world. Or so the rumor goes. I found no evidence of a collider in any official article about Particle 1 Labs. If one existed, it would have been massive, taking up miles of space and costing billions of dollars. It wouldn't have fit on one floor of their building. I came to a definitive conclusion years ago. A power surge had caused the explosion and nothing more. Life isn't always some grand conspiracy. I checked the sleep monitors. Everything was back to normal. Jackie was still in stage 4, her heart rate and breathing at their lowest levels so far. Good. Hopefully that night terror earlier was the last of tonight's entertainment, I thought. Speaking of entertainment, my eyes fell upon the Urbex Check YouTube video that I was playing earlier. It was still paused at the moment that Jackie entered the Long Pine Sanitarium. Who would have posted that video, and why tonight, I thought. Was it one of the other girls on her team? Did Jackie even know about the post? She didn't mention it earlier when we were talking about her channel. And why post something where they were clearly breaking the law? I would tell Jackie about this when she wakes up tomorrow morning. I didn't want her to get in trouble. But for now, I clicked play on the YouTube video and the footage continued from Jackie's POV as she entered the pitch-black interior of Long Pine's mental asylum. There was some coughing, then Jackie clicked on a camera-mounted light, illuminating the crumbling foyer. Millions of dust motes danced in the air. "What do you see?" her friend asked from outside. Nothing." Jackie coughed some more. "Just old junk." She panned the camera around, revealing broken and rotten furniture. Chairs, shelves, wardrobes. Jackie walked forward, entering a hallway connected to the foyer. "Don't go too far." Her friend's voice was barely audible on the tape. "I'm just gonna take a quick look around," Jackie responded. Her camera light shone upon a series of decaying prison cells connected to the hall. All of them were open. There was one room every dozen yards or so on the left side of the passageway. Most rooms were empty save for a rusty bed frame or a mildewed sheet. I could hear Jackie's breathing increase as she ventured down the hall. She sounded scared, but she kept going. It was almost as if something was compelling her to continue. As soon as her camera lit up its interior, she gasped. Someone had scrawled complex mathematical equations and crude drawings all over the walls in black crayon. Many images were violent: stick figure beheadings and amputations, machine guns firing a hail of bullets, a mushroom cloud. Other drawings were straight out of a horror show. People with extra arms and heads spouting from their bodies. A disembodied mouth full of row upon row of sharp teeth, like a shark's jaws. Whoever stayed in this cell was both a madman and a genius. The image became jittery. Jackie's hand must have been shaking as she held the camera. Her breathing quickened. "Get the hell out of there," I said aloud, as if Jackie were inside the hospital at that moment and not sleeping peacefully down the hall. Thankfully, Jackie didn't enter the cell. but her camera fell upon a manila folder lying on the floor next to the doorway. She grabbed this folder and ran out of the building. It took a moment for the camera to adjust to the bright sunshine outside. The pleasant mountainside couldn't have been more different from the oppressive darkness that Jackie had just left. "What the hell were you doing in there so long?" Jackie's friend asked as she came outside. She was on the verge of panic, holding her iPhone. "I was about to call the cops." Jackie handed the camera back to her friend. "Hey, it's okay, I'm fine. Here, film this." The POV shifted to show Jackie holding the mildewy folder that she had grabbed. "I think these are medical records." She was correct, and my jaw dropped when I saw the patient's name on the cover. Virgil Gibson. Jackie opened the folder. There was my uncle's photo, but it was all wrong. He was wrinkled and balding. Wisps of gray hair stuck to his liver-spotted head. Virgil had grown old. Impossibly old for somebody who had died at the age of 40. Jackie flipped through the pages. "Whoa, it says here he disemboweled a man. They found him eating the man in his apartment. Disgusting." My parents had lied. Uncle Virgil had never killed himself. He was locked away in a mental institution for murder. He spent decades there and nobody in our family had ever visited him. Jackie read from one of the many doctor's reports in the folder. The subject exhibits signs of paranoid delusion combined with schizophrenia and megalomania. Claims to be an interdimensional being that he calls the Kaleidoscope Man, who controls him in his sleep. Yo, this is some wild stuff. How had Jackie not mentioned any of this earlier, especially after I had asked her about the Kaleidoscope Man? Did she forget this whole event had happened? In the video, Jackie kept flipping through the pages. Looks like they didn't know how to treat him. He bounced around from one facility to the next before he landed here. The patient suffers from sleepwalking, often turns the lights on and off in his sleep in a specific pattern. "A specific pattern like Morse code?" her friend asked. I paused the YouTube video, my hand shaking. This was too much. I mean, this can't be real, I thought. I went over to the monitor that was recording Jackie's sleep. I rewound the footage to the beginning of her sleepwalking night terror incident. I rewatched Jackie slip out of bed and then turn the lamp on and off, on and off. It was a pattern. I pulled out a notepad to jot it down. There were times she quickly turned the light on that could correspond to a Morse code. Dot. And then there were times that she would leave it on for a few seconds before switching off. A Morse code, dash. I had to rewatch the whole sequence a few times to get the pattern. Dot dot dash, dot 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 dash, dot dot. And then the cycle repeated over and over. Perhaps the girl from the video was correct. Could it be Morse code? If it was, a quick Google search revealed the answer. It was a single word. Dot dot dash dot 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 dash dot dot. Translated to FEED. Feed. All of a sudden I heard beeping again. Jackie's sleep monitors were going haywire. Brainwaves spiking, heartbeat racing, muscle tension at maximum. If this were a parasomnia, it was the biggest one that I had ever seen. I switched the night vision camera footage back to its live feed. Jackie was out of bed again, eyes wide and blank. She started ripping the sleep monitoring devices from her body, tearing out clumps of hair as she removed the electrodes from her scalp. And then the camera feed cut out. I jumped out of my chair and rushed down the hall to her bedroom. "Jackie!" But she wasn't there. All of her monitoring devices lay on the floor. She had removed them lightning quick. "Jackie!" A scream pierced the quiet. But it wasn't Jackie's scream, it was a man's scream. I ran across the hall, ripping open the door to Austin's bedroom. It was so bright that I immediately shut my eyes, fearing that I would go blind. "Austin!" I called out. No response. "Why are the walls red? Did they repaint the room?" "Austin," I called out again. "What's going on? Where's Jackie?" The screams were so loud that they rattled my brain. I had never heard such agony before. It was guttural, animalistic. I had to see what was going on, and so I cracked open my eyes just a sliver. The light felt like it was burning my retinas. Austin lay in bed, soaked in blood. Blood covered everything in the room, even the walls, and now repainted in death. There was so much blood, too much for just one person. And it was all flowing up towards the ceiling, as if gravity had suddenly reversed. "The river flows only upward." My uncle's words echoed in my head. "Please make it stop," Austin cried. Jackie stood over her father. I saw her bloodied arms pulling out his intestines like she was coiling a slimy rope. It was so methodical, so lifeless. "Jackie!" But when I tried to look at her face, I only saw a series of brilliantly colored lights, constantly shifting between fractal patterns, too bright to focus on and too complex to comprehend. I nearly went blind when I saw that face. I could feel my sanity slipping away. The whole world was suddenly too much to handle, too frightening to be real. I screamed and screamed and screamed and woke up screaming on the bloody floor, Austin's pale, lifeless body staring at me. They say I never had a patient named Jackie, only a man named Austin. He came in that night for a routine sleep study. They say that I was suffering from insomnia, that I hadn't had a whole night's sleep in weeks, perhaps even months. They say they found me lying next to Austin, my arms wrapped around his intestines, a bloodied knife on the floor. I told them about the kaleidoscope man and my Uncle Virgil. They noted my family history of psychosis. I told them about Jackie and the YouTube video at Long Pines. They reminded me that Jackie never existed, and that I was now at Long Pines, just like my uncle. They locked me up in here, told me that I would likely never return to the outside world, but I would get better in time with the proper medicine and treatment. But they don't see him visit me each night, whispering commands. They lock me up in his cell, but they don't know all the doorways hidden in the dark corners of this world, and how many of them open when we sleep. I've always associated my birthday with that depressing time of year where a cozy autumn turns into an early winter decay, where colorful leaves die, leaving a withered brown shell behind. Still, people are expected to celebrate their birthdays. It's strange if one doesn't. I don't. My fiancé recently asked me why I never celebrate my birthday, and it's a hard one to explain. When you've been through something traumatic, everything sort of brings you back to that moment, one way or the other. And while I would love to tell her about it, I don't think I can without sounding like a maniac. I thought I would start by just telling my story anonymously and sort of go from there. It was the year that I turned 13. Since You've Been Gone was blasting on the radio every hour of the day. My friends and I were quoting How I Met Your Mother religiously. It was a good time to be a kid. Since my birthday was in the middle of the school week, my big birthday plans were postponed until the up-and-coming weekend. Still, I couldn't complain. Birthday cake on a Tuesday didn't sound all that bad. I got home, had a small celebration with my parents, and opened a few presents. 2 new games for my PlayStation 2. Score. I finished up my homework and I browsed the internet for a few hours ahead of my scheduled bedtime, when there was a knock at the door. We rarely had visitors, so to have somebody knocking at our door at 10 p.m. was unusual to say the least. My parents had already opened the door by the time that I was halfway down the stairs. There was a man in a fancy jacket with a clipboard standing outside, along with 2 armed guards. I sort of fell into the middle of the conversation. "So, we need you to sign the consent form and we'll get started," the clipboard man said. "Any questions?" "This can't be legal," my mom said. "On what kind of authority are you?" "Ma'am, this is an emergency. We have been authorized to bring anyone and everyone if need be. But I promise you it'll be a less pleasant experience than what you could achieve here in the comfort of your own home." As the discussion continued, the armed men pushed into the house. They had a sort of checklist they were going through, asking questions as they poked and prodded. Someone mentioned a satellite phone which we didn't have. I hurried back upstairs. From my window, I could see them putting wheel locks on our car. They were testing some sort of electrical equipment too, and as they did, I could see the internet connection on my computer disappear. My cell phone lost all bars, and while I didn't check, I suspected they had done something to our landline as well. They were isolating us, putting us under some sort of lockdown. I still didn't have the slightest idea of who these people were. There were no patches, badges, ranks, or symbols. Just a bunch of serious-looking men in windbreakers, with visible gun holsters. After a few minutes, one of the men entered my room. My parents were worried sick, but were told to wait outside. The man was about 6'4" and had the look of someone who could kill me with his bare teeth if need be. Without a word, he started going through my things. "You got any walkie-talkies?" he asked. "Any radio science projects or something like that?" "Nope," I said, shaking my head. "I got a PlayStation 2, and that can go online, right?" I never got the chance to answer before my mom added, "We don't let him play online games," she said. "He can't do that." As if to make sure, he pulled the power cable and dropped it in a sealed bag along with various knickknacks and keys that they had collected. They weren't taking any chances, and I wasn't playing my new games anytime soon, it seemed. As they finished up their impromptu house inspection, we were asked to gather downstairs. The fancy man with the clipboard cleared his throat, and the room fell deathly silent. Even my dad, who was usually a very assertive man, didn't have much to add to the conversation. That's how you knew it was serious. "For 72 hours, this and surrounding neighborhoods are under lockdown," the man explained. "There is a localized problem related to a recent geological event which has caused some unexpected issues. I'm sure you've noticed some minor oddities as of late." "Like what?" my dad added. "Milk turning sour, houseplants getting a strange colored tint, swarms of frogs cluttering the roads." My parents said nothing, but they nodded. Perhaps they had seen something that I hadn't. The man put down his clipboard as he explained calmly, "You have been exposed to something akin to a chemical. It reacts violently to the release of certain hormones which are associated with deep REM sleep. To ensure your safety, we are currently enforcing a temporary 72-hour ban on sleep." "Excuse me?" My dad took a step forward, but one of the armed men responded in kind. They both stopped before it had the chance to escalate. "Exposure was approximately 9 hours ago, meaning that you have 63 hours left to go. That'll be approximately 1 p.m. on Friday. There's no way that we can. This is non-negotiable. This is a matter of your security, sir. We have an emergency health service site, but I can promise you that it won't be pleasant. You will be chemically induced into sleeplessness for the full duration of exposure until the event has passed. It can cause long-lasting brain damage." We were handed a folder each explaining our responsibilities and rights. An unmarked red folder with 3 papers. one explaining their right to force this upon us, another explaining that we had already signed the consent papers, and a third one was a form explaining exactly when we could go to sleep. And there was also an inventory form explaining the items that we were to have returned at the end of the containment. They left a box of 50 glass vials, some kind of 4-hour booster shots. The man explained how underage children were not to take more than one every 7 hours, and that my mother, if pregnant, shouldn't take any at all. Luckily, my mom wasn't pregnant. I'm an only child. We were also given fiber bars with some kind of hormone supplement, unmarked and unbranded but warm. Maybe they were made recently. The packaging was sloppy at best. The fancy man was trying his best to explain, and I could see that my parents were eager to listen, but I barely understood half of it. Instead, I looked at the armed guards. They looked exhausted. Maybe they too weren't allowed to sleep. One of them had his mouth open and almost drooled, blinking one eye at a time. I could have sworn that he nodded off for a second, which prompted him to take a walk outside. "I don't know if we can do this," my mother complained. It's a lot to ask, and we've only just..." "If at any point you can't do this, you need to call this number. It's the only number that works," the man said, pointing to the final line on the final page of the folder. "If somebody falls asleep and can't be awakened within a few minutes, they're in terrible danger. If that happens, try to keep them awake by any means until we can get here to pick them up. And then they'll be taken to our site in Mankato, where they'll be chemically induced to stay awake." "So what exactly happens if someone doesn't make it?" my mom asked. "If we all just fall asleep?" The man shook his head, tapping the clipboard with his pen. "And they will most probably die. Others might too." While I went into the kitchen to explain the details, the angry-looking guard approached me with the sealed bag, handing me back my PlayStation 2 power cable. He gave me a pat on the shoulder. "I checked with the tech team. You're good to go. And, happy birthday." I had almost forgotten that it was my birthday. I appreciated the gesture, but I just couldn't bring myself to smile. I had too many questions bubbling in the back of my head, and I was too afraid to speak. They probably talked for another 20 minutes or so before the man left, leaving my parents and I alone in the kitchen. My mother was smoking under the kitchen fan. I had only ever seen her smoke 2 times, once when she lost her job, and another time when her father got sick. Smoking in the kitchen was a surefire way to tell that something was wrong. Dad was sitting with his arms crossed, looking at the box of booster shots. "This is not a joke," my dad finally said. "This is very serious. We're all gonna need to help each other to get through this." Mom said nothing, but I could see her hands trembling. She had been crying. She was shaking so much that the ash from her cigarette didn't reach the ashtray. It just plopped down on the stove. "We can't be alone," Dad continued. "We're gonna do our best to keep busy. You can play as many games as you want, but you can't fall asleep." "They gave me back my power cable," I said. "Does that mean it's okay for me to use the PlayStation?" "It's okay," Mom coughed. "It's okay, honey, play your games." For those first few hours, I didn't understand what the big deal was. No more school for the rest of the week. No bedtime and unlimited screen time. That didn't sound too bad. I gamed late into the night. Sly 2 and Ratchet & Clank were on the menu, and I had a blast. I got some snacks along with one of those fiber bars. They tasted like twigs and raisins, but they made my brain calm. Not tired, but it made it easier to focus. It also made it harder to shut my eyes, making my eyelids itch. All lights in the house were kept on all throughout the night. Mom and Dad kept playing music on the downstairs stereo, and they desperately tried to keep me engaged. I was engaged enough just playing games, so I think it was more for their benefit rather than mine. At 5 a.m., Dad took his first booster shot. I could hear it all the way from upstairs. He was cussing pretty hard. Apparently those things tasted like a mix of stale rice and death. Mom took her first boost about half an hour later, but she mixed it with orange juice. Apparently that helped a lot. And by 7 a.m., even I was feeling it. I had never been up all night playing games like that on a school day before. I mean, sure, I had pulled all-nighters with my friends, but it was usually something that we prepared for. So by early morning, I could feel myself nodding off. My parents were checking in on me every now and then and decided to act. We were having family breakfast, pretending as if we had already slept. "Oh, you're always cranky in the morning," Mom said. "Try to imagine this is just that. Another cranky morning." I knew for a fact that they had slipped one of those boosters into my cereal. I saw 3 empty vials on the counter, and I knew that none of them had taken a second one yet. Still, I had little choice but to try. We weren't even halfway through the containment yet. As we finished our breakfast, we could hear commotion outside. I was upstairs brushing my teeth, watching through the hallway window. It was our neighbors, Larry Peterson, the 55-year-old man who worked at the fishing supplies at the local mini-mall. He crawled out his front door. He was throwing up something black and blue onto the pavement. I had never seen this man do anything more physically straining than trying to start a lawnmower, and now he was crawling on all fours like his life depended on it. I could hear his wife calling from inside. She was screaming at him, but I couldn't hear what. Larry got up and almost leapt into the back of his pickup truck in a show of athleticism that I had never seen from him before. It wasn't until his wife got out of the house that I could hear what she was saying. Larry, wake up!" I saw Larry Peterson grab a wrench, get out of his truck, and grab his wife by the hair. Suddenly, a hand covered my eyes as my father dragged me away from the window. I could hear a scream turn into a gargle, followed by a hearty laugh, one that I had heard 1,000 times before. The same kind of laugh that Larry Peterson would chuckle up whenever my dad tried to pull off a bad joke. My mind painted me a picture of what had happened, and it wasn't pretty. My dad spun me around and stared into my eyes. I could tell that he wasn't himself. There were lines across his face that I hadn't seen before. "Stay with me and your mother," he said. "Don't look outside. People are getting sick." "Are we getting sick, Dad?" I asked, a yawn escaping me. He shook me a little as if to make sure that I was paying attention. "We're gonna be fine," he said. "It's just a matter of time, but I don't want you to see people getting hurt. Larry isn't feeling well." There was a knock on the front door. Dad took point as Mom hid in the bedroom. I remember standing on the top of the stairs, looking over the railing to the floor below. There was a violent, angry pounding on the door. Larry Peterson's soft chuckle coming from the other side. He didn't say anything. He just pounded on the door with his wrench, laughing as he tried to get in. He went around the house, rattling our windows. He didn't get far before we could hear a car roll up. There was a popping sound, but not like a gunshot. I think they tased him. By the time that I could hear Larry Peterson getting dragged off, my mom had come upstairs with a smile taped to her face, asking me to show how far I had gotten in my fancy new video games. She was clearly trying to keep me distracted, but I didn't mind. At that point, I wanted desperately to be distracted. I could imagine Larry Peterson on the other side of the front door, his white t-shirt stained with that strange black and blue goo that he had thrown up, wielding that wrench with a manic grip. The thing was as large as my arm in solid metal. I had never considered it a weapon, but thinking about it made my blood run cold. Had he really killed Mrs. Peterson? And why? Mom and I spent the next few hours playing video games. We also made a plan. We went through our old DVDs and decided on a watching schedule. She had originally planned to walk, but now we weren't to leave the house. She didn't want to say why, but I had the feelings that there was something outside the Petersons' home that she didn't want me to see. Bloodstains, maybe. I was too afraid to find out. My parents tried their best to keep the mood up, but I could tell that it was getting to them too. My dad was mostly just standing there leaning against the door, staring straight ahead like in a trance. Mom tried to occupy herself by playing games and watching DVDs with me, but she was counting the minutes until she could get her next booster shot. I wasn't eager to take one. They made my stomach all queasy. We made it all the way until noon. Dad was having trouble staying up and kept washing his head with cold water. He tried to keep busy doing housework that he had kept for a rainy day, but there were constant distractions. We could hear sirens in the distance, and at one point there was somebody spraying our front door and windows with a high-pressure water hose, possibly to wash off the last traces of Larry Peterson. There were dog patrols going up and down the street, along with the occasional phone call. The one number that still worked, where somebody called to make sure that we were all awake and accounted for. By dinner time, Mom was having stomach troubles. Her shaking had gotten worse and she was having trouble with a sudden change of smells. Dad kept rubbing his eyes and checking his watch, getting up every 10 minutes or so just to move around. We had decided that we were going to play board games after dinner, but Mom was having trouble keeping herself from throwing up. We ended up just reheating some lasagna from a few days back. I didn't mind, Mom made amazing lasagna, but my appetite was quickly lost when I saw my mother barely keeping it together. She kept drooling and making this weird chugging sound. She was blinking slower and slower. Dad tried to get her to eat one of the fiber bars, but she just ran out of the kitchen, locking herself in the bathroom. It was touch and go for a while. I could feel my heart racing as Dad tried to convince her to unlock the door, but she just couldn't do it. After a while, she stopped responding. Dad had to break the handle with a hammer, but it was too late. She was already sleeping. I could hear it through the door. As the door burst open, Mom had only been asleep for a couple of seconds, a minute at the most. But she was sitting on the toilet, her head leaning back, and something was coming out of her mouth. Black and blue fingertips, poking out over the edge of her lips. Her throat undulated. The moment that Dad grabbed her, she tipped her head forward, coughing. Dad washed her face in the sink, while yelling at me to wait in the other room. For a few minutes, I was just sitting there ready to run or hide. It might have been too late, I figured. She could have already been affected, like Larry Peterson. I could hear them arguing in the other room, and as their voices went from angry to desperate to sad, I didn't know what to do. When they finally returned, they sat me down to explain that we were going to be fine, that we were almost halfway through and that we were in the home stretch. They were so kind, warm, and careful in the way they explained it, but my mind was 1,000 miles away. I had trouble focusing and all I could think about was that strange noise that I kept hearing in the background. Something outside. Dad was halfway through explaining how we weren't going to lock our bathroom doors anymore when something in me screamed at me to react. It was just a slight click, but it was as clear as day. Maybe it was those booster shots. But I kept hyper-focusing on little details rather than big picture stuff, like an actual conversation taking place in front of me. I closed my eyes and no less than a second later, there was a loud bang. Somebody was shooting at us. It was only a couple of shots, but we dropped to the ground. One shot got lodged in the front door while the other cracked the kitchen window. There were loud voices outside laughing hysterically. They were talking but barely making any sense. One of them sounded like she was trying to talk with food in her mouth. Mom and Dad kept quiet as two more shots popped off, one of them hitting the kitchen light. With an electric spark, it gave out, blacking out most of the kitchen. I could hear somebody running and laughing as they continued down the street. In the distance, there was more gunfire, maybe somebody responding in kind. "We can't stay here," Mom whispered. "We gotta call them." "You want to go to where they put Larry," Dad answered, "to be in a whole hospital full of these people." "Well, they're shooting at us, we can't just..." Mom quieted down and looked at me. She and Dad excused themselves to talk in private, while I was asked to move upstairs. I was to stay away from windows and I couldn't sit or lie down, and they'd be up to check on me in a bit. But of course, I was too curious. While still hearing them argue downstairs, I checked an upstairs window. I could see pretty far down the street, and in the distance, I could make out a car stalling on the side of the road. The headlights were still on, but it was surrounded by at least 6 people. 2 of them were dressed like the armed guards that we had seen from before. It took me a while to realize that there was an old man sitting in that car. I had seen him around a couple of times, but I didn't know his name. The surrounding people were trying to crack the car windows with various weapons. Tire irons, bricks, hammers, lead pipes, whatever they could get their hands on. It didn't take them long to break through. They reached in to pull the man out. It was too far off for me to hear his screams, but I could vaguely see what they were doing. They held him down and covered his face with their hands. His eyes, his mouth, his ears, leaving only his nose to breathe through. And then they just sat there. It took me a moment to realize what they were doing. They were forcing him to sleep. After a few minutes, they let go of him. The old man slowly stood up, leaned against his car, and started to dry heave. After a while, the same blue and black goo that I had seen from Larry Peterson started pouring out of his mouth, stopping only as he coughed up some kind of clot that could barely fit in his mouth. A clot that moved. As he straightened his back, he looked at the strange group, and they walked down the street together. Some jogged, some sprinted, one of them crawled, but it looked like he held onto something with his teeth. Either that or something was coming out of his mouth, something long. As they hurried down the street, I could hear more gunfire. In the distance, coming from another way, I could see another group of people. At least a dozen, but heading in another direction. Roaming gangs of sleep-deprived, sick people. God knows how this thing affected them long term. When my parents were done discussing, they sat me down to explain that we were going to stay indoors and keep away from the windows just in case. We were locking all doors and windows, closing all curtains, and not playing anything louder than necessary. We were to draw as little attention as possible. Of course I agreed. I mean, what choice did I have? That night, I could tell that things were slowly falling apart. Dad almost took a double dose of booster shots as he forgot that he had taken the first one, but Mom stopped him. There were no phone calls coming in. They had stopped checking in on us. Mom even tried calling, but the line had been disconnected. The gunfire outside was further away but more frequent. We could hear cars honking but no sirens. And then there were fires. At least 2 somewhere downtown. We could see the smokestacks from afar. Mom wasn't doing well. She couldn't eat, and at times she could barely stay on her feet. She kept talking out loud even if nobody was in the room with her, and she had to lean against things to stay upright. She couldn't keep the fiber bars down, and she walked around with her head bobbing back and forth. Dad tried his best to keep her active, but he was having trouble as well. No matter how many cold splashes he took to the face, he just couldn't stay attentive. I wasn't doing well either, but nowhere near as bad. I still had my appetite and I took my booster shots, but I could feel the side effects. My hands kept shaking and I had a nasty headache. There were these pinches down my neck like somebody shocking me with a wet battery. I'd imagined things moving just outside of my vision. I kept turning around to look at the windows as I had started to hallucinate that they were screens. By morning, there was a new problem. Both the power and the water had been cut. There was a small lake a short walk from the house, and we had no choice but to try and get some water by hand. We had some drinking water stocked in the kitchen, but we needed some for the bathroom. Mom volunteered to go, but that was out of the question. She could barely stand or make a coherent sentence. There was no discussion. Dad had to do it. We watched him from one of the upstairs windows. The sun had just risen, bathing the withering landscape in long, sharp shadows into sickly bright glow. Mom was just staring blankly ahead, as if trying to remember what was so important. Isn't it your birthday soon?" she said out loud. "That was Tuesday," I responded. "Did you wish for you to get older?" she asked. I wish for that. I want you to be able to get older." She looked at me and laughed. She blinked one eye at a time, her left eye lingering a little longer than her right. Her eyes were sunken and dark, and she kept going cross-eyed. I think she meant well, but that look she gave me was nothing short of terrifying. It was like she had been reduced to her most basic self. My mom was still in there somewhere, but most of it was just gone. After about an hour, I spotted Dad coming back. Mom and I were both relieved, but it didn't last long. I noticed that he wasn't carrying any water, and moments later I could see that he wasn't alone. There were about 24 more people coming with them. Mom didn't seem to react. She looked out the window and nodded to herself. For a moment she was almost falling asleep standing up, her mouth moving up and down on its own like a fish out of water. I could see something moving in her throat. I shook her, and in a moment of clarity she looked out the window again. As I heard something pound against the door downstairs, Mom pushed me into the closet. She ran downstairs to get the remaining booster shots and dropped it all on me along with her wristwatch and a couple of fiber bars. "Someone will come and get you," she said. Just wait and stay awake. I'll try to think of something." I didn't have the time to protest before she slammed the closet shut. I could hear a key slide into the lock downstairs. Dad may have forgotten something about who he was, but he hadn't forgotten how to use the house keys. I just sat there in the dark listening. I curled up into a ball, but I didn't want to get too comfortable. I could hear furniture being turned over, unfamiliar voices yelling obscenities or incoherent nonsense. A fight broke out and I could hear somebody throwing something. Another person ran up the stairs and into the bathroom, repeatedly kicking the bathtub. A woman screamed and then a man. There was a gunshot followed by windows being broken. I could hear a muffled scream as if someone was held down, maybe like they did with the old man outside the night before. I must have sat there for hours. In the dark, it was hard to tell if my eyes were open or not. I couldn't tell if I was really hearing something outside or if I was just imagining it. I could hear voices and whispers, but they didn't seem to make sense. Sometimes I imagined them standing just outside my door, asking me for the cheat codes for the games that I'd played. All I had to keep my waning sanity company was my mom's wristwatch. and I could barely make it out. Time passed so strangely. I could be wrapped in thought for what felt like hours but only minutes passed, and then I would catch myself staring straight ahead, and 2 hours could disappear. I kept repeating the next scheduled hour for the booster shot like a mantra. But things were getting stranger. The clock would go backwards. I would imagine somebody sitting across from me, a pair of white eyes staring back at me from the dark. There were little voices telling me to go to sleep, and I found myself nodding off. I could feel something moving in on me like a hand trying to fit into a glove. I finally gave up and got out of the closet. I could barely stand as I dragged the booster shots and fiber bars along in a plastic bag. I didn't care if there was anyone downstairs. I needed to see something. I needed light or some kind of stimuli. The whole house was trashed. Every piece of furniture broken, every light smashed. There was blood spatter on the walls, and the front door was hanging on a single hinge. Every window was smashed, and our picture frames had been thrown across the room like ninja stars. But the strangest thing was an acrid smell coming from the kitchen. At first, I didn't understand what it was. It looked like a person, but there was the wrong number of limbs. After a few seconds of adjustment and trying to force myself to clarity, I realized it was a body. A young man with a knife sticking out of his chest, splayed out on the kitchen floor. His jaw was extended and broken on one side. There was a black and blue arm reaching out of his throat, reaching upwards to grab his own head. Something in me stirred. Something in me didn't like what I was looking at, and I wasn't sure if it was me or something else. I tried to push it down with a fiber bar, which strangely worked. I made my way outside in a daze. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to find my parents, another part of me wanted to get out of town. I wanted to look for a bike or just start walking or catch a bus. Of course, there were no buses to catch, but my sleep-deprived mind couldn't separate fact from fiction anymore. That entire night was one long living nightmare. I kept imagining things coming out from the dark. I could hear voices telling me to turn around, to stop, to run, all at once and none at all. I could barely keep my balance, and stopping even for a moment would send me straight to sleep. I had to keep going. I even took an extra booster shot, which just gave me this sharp joint pain and made me sweat. I could tell that I had done something stupid. I took a shortcut through the park. I could see faces coming out of the trees, and I saw a man lying face down on the gravel path, being pulled forward by an arm coming out of his mouth. I saw a man out by the lake repeatedly slapping his arms against the cold water surface, like a manic child trying to get as high a splash as possible. Some of it was real, some of it wasn't. I couldn't tell which was which, and not anymore. When I finally reached downtown, I saw at least 24 people gathered outside a burned building. All of them with black and blue arms reaching out of their mouths, stretching towards the flames, as if slowly wafting air towards them. Like human kelp moving against an invisible current, they leaned back and forth in unison, praising whatever chaos they had caused without a word or sound. And yet I could hear them, welcoming me and beckoning me, all voices unique, carried to me by an unfelt wind. Come closer. You belong here. I turned away and the voices grew louder and desperate, screeching, demanding my attention and my devotion. Some of them coming from outside, some of them coming from the rumble of my stomach. It's already here, it laughed. It'll never go away. It'll never sleep. It'll never stop. Hands reached for me, a face in every window, voices reaching from beneath the concrete. Gunfire, broken windows, glass cracking under my rubber boots as I shuffled past burnt-out cars. It was dark and then bright and then dark again, and at some point I succumbed. I felt concrete against my cheek, but I couldn't bring myself to get up. My legs wouldn't move, my eyes wouldn't open. Yes, come to us, come burn with us. And then darkness. I don't know how long I was out, hours, maybe half a day. I woke up to see a man running towards me asking me if I was okay. A car had pulled over, bathing me in a warm light. By the side of the road, a colony of frogs looked at me. In the distance, my eyes landed on a discolored sunflower. It had turned blue. Strange how you don't notice the most obvious changes until they stare at you in the face. It turns out exposure had happened at least 6 hours earlier than the man with the clipboard had predicted, and I had been awake long enough for most of the effect to pass through my system. I was found unconscious by the side of the highway, about 9 miles from my house. While I did have an uncomfortable, dreamless sleep, the effects that it had on me were nowhere near as bad as what had happened to most of the neighborhood. I'm sure you've heard of it. Riots, they called it. Just another mess up in a low-income area. I don't even think it reached national news. Some of the people who had succumbed to it early got permanent brain damage. Larry Peterson was never the same, but it was hard to tell if it was because of the emotional trauma or the sleep thing. Either way, he had to have a nurse look after him a few times a week for the rest of his life. Mom and Dad weren't completely unharmed either. Mom developed some kind of narcolepsy after that night, spontaneously nodding off at the most inopportune times. Dad lost his sense of taste and smell. To this day, they're having a hard time explaining what exactly they experienced. To them, it was just like going to sleep and having the most horrible nightmare, only to wake up in a hospital bed. Sometimes I wonder if I did fall asleep. Some of the things that I saw were so strange that there was no way to tell if they were real or not. I vividly remember that scene of hands waving back and forth outside that burning building downtown. I mean, it had to be real. That building really did burn. As you might imagine, I've had a hard time looking back at this. Thinking too much about it gives me this icy feeling in the pit of my stomach, like a small part of me believes that this is all just a big nightmare, that I'm still just a clock's tick away from waking up in that closet, with somebody standing just outside waiting for me. Or maybe it's something inside of me still waiting to grab the reins. Maybe it's just a night away,